promoting officers who aren't white? That's the question we asked in this story, first broadcast last fall. When Marine Corps Colonel Fred Peck was testifying before Congress about another issue, gays in the military, he made what seemed to be a slip of the tongue. He said that his gay son was a recruiter's dream, blonde hair and blue-eyed. African-American officers we talked to said that was no slip of the tongue. That is a recruiter's dream.
If I was blonde-haired and blue-eyed and 6'1" and a closet homosexual, I'd be in the cockpit of the CH-46 aircraft right now.
Captain Marcus Hartman used to be a CH-46 Marine helicopter pilot.
After approximately 670 hours of military flight time, I had the first individual in my command said, Captain Hartman is not competent to fly in the cockpit. When I challenged that individual a few days later, he resorted to screaming at me and calling me boy in front of a wardroom full of officers.
And you obviously felt that was racist.
I felt that was, at best, it was degrading. At worst, it was racist. But I know that there is no way that a white captain is in a position where he can call a black captain boy.
Hartman failed 2 flight tests, both administered by the same white captain who called him boy. Then he was told he couldn't fly again. Hartman thinks that's business as usual in the Marine Corps, where only 2% of the pilots are black. Captain Gerald Gaskins agrees with him. And in your opinion, is it racism?
In my opinion, yes, it is racism. It's institutionalized racism.
But flat out, no mistake about it, in your view.
There's no doubt in my mind that it's racism.
And he said that even though one of his superior officers urged him not to talk to us. Captain Gaskins recently learned that he's being promoted to the rank of major. But he did some research and found out that most black captains don't get promoted to major, and most white captains do. Courtesy, he says, of an old boy network. The old boy network, I take it, is an all-white club.
Yes, because I think people want to promote their own kind. And the more you look like your leadership, the better off you do in this system.
Gaskin says he knows a white officer who got promoted who can barely write a complete sentence. And he says he really got fed up when he saw these statistics. About 90% of the captains are white. And as you go up the chain of command, the percentage of whites goes up too. 97% of colonels are white. And when it gets to generals... How many African-American generals are there in the Marine Corps?
Just me. Just one.
And how many white generals are there in the Marine Corps?
About 61 or 62.
Brigadier General George Walls has been an officer for 28 years. Now, you're retiring this year.
Yes.
Will that mean that there'll be no minority general at all?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I believe that when I leave, there will be nobody else. But I am very, very confident that the Marine Corps will have more minority general officers soon.
Do you feel totally free to be honest with us?
Yes, I certainly do.
I mean, you're in an organization where there's authority. I mean, would it be considered breaking ranks if you went on 60 Minutes and said there's racism in the Marine Corps?
If I felt that was the case, which I don't, I would be totally free and totally honest with you and tell you that.
He said he's living proof that the Marine Corps is not a racist institution.
The system works. It really does work.
For you.
For everybody.
But Major Matthew Conley, who left the service in June, doesn't think it worked for him.
Anyone who has done 28 years and 6 months and 7 days in my case, anyone who's done that much time with an outfit kind of hurts when you leave.
The Marine Corps held a farewell ceremony for Major Conley, but Conley says he didn't want to leave. He was forced out. He'd been passed over for promotion, and he knew he'd be passed over again. For most officers in the Corps, 2 strikes and you're out. Were the people who were promoted better than you?
Some of them, yes. I would be an utter fool to think that there weren't some who were better than me. And just like some were better, there were some who were worse.
And were they white?
Of course.
It's almost unheard of for Marines, especially Marine officers, to complain to the media about the Corps. But it's not just Major Conley and Captain Gaskins. Lieutenant Euseekers Williams was a Marine officer, but the Corps wouldn't let him go to flight school, so he became a pilot in the Navy.
You cannot be as good as your white counterparts. You have to be better.
Well, wait, does everybody agree with that?
Yes.
I agree.
Let me ask you, you're not black.
Nope.
Is there racism in the Marine Corps?
I'd be a liar if I said there wasn't.
Why did you put it that way? Why don't you just say yes?
It's not a comfortable thing to talk about. It's not a comfortable thing to have to acknowledge.
One officer told us you don't have to be white, you just have to act white.
I did the more traditional white things. I now play golf, I hunted, I fished. I wore my polo shirt.
And listen to country western. Don't forget that.
And yes, I listen to my country western.
But acting white isn't enough to get promoted. Marines get promoted based on fitness reports filled out by their superiors. And according to a lot of the Marines we spoke to, fitness means, do you fit your commanding officer's idea of what a Marine officer should look like? If you don't, everything else, they say, is academic. Major Conley confronted one of his commanding officers to find out why he received a mediocre fitness report.
I go down and ask him, sir, what does it take for me to be an outstanding officer? What do I have to do? And his only answer is, well, you're almost outstanding. Well, that doesn't answer the question, Colonel. What does it take for me to be outstanding? What am I doing wrong? So finally, he became angered and threw me out of his office.
It's not just harder for minorities to get promoted. It's harder for them to even become officers in the first place. Bruce Yamashita, a third-generation American from Hawaii, didn't know that when he volunteered for officer candidate school. He had just graduated from Georgetown Law School and hoped to be a lawyer in the Marine Corps.
The first day of OCS, one sergeant came up to me and said, we don't want your kind around here. He says, you go back to your own country. And he screamed that. I was humiliated. There was a tingle up my spine, and I felt like someone had kicked me in the stomach.
Yamashita says the sergeants continued to ridicule him throughout the 9-week course, calling him by the names of Japanese products like Kawasaki and Yamaha, or referring to him as Kamikaze Man. 2 days before graduation, 5 officer candidates were asked to leave. 4 out of the 5 were minorities, including Bruce Yamashita. They say you flunked out because you just weren't good enough.
Let me just put it to you this way. The people who gave those scores, who gave those evaluations, were the very staffers, the very sergeants who engaged in this unlawful discriminatory conduct.
Yamashita has taken legal action to force the Marines to admit that he was discriminated against. While the Corps has officially apologized to him for the racial remarks and even offered to let him return, they still insist Yamashita was ousted because he failed the course outright. We came to Marine Corps headquarters to find out why they consistently kick out a greater percentage of minorities than whites. At first we were told it's because of lower scores on scholastic aptitude tests. In other words, they were saying that the minority officers just aren't as smart, at least academically, as the whites. We put that to Major Michael Lundy.
I think once somebody else realizes what they said, you might not get the same comment when you go back.
He was right. We didn't. 2 months later, we got a different explanation when we were invited back to headquarters to speak to the Commandant, General Carl Mundy, Jr. He said that test scores were just a small part of the problem.
It has to do with performance because that's what we judge promotion on.
General Mundy said that in the Marine training schools, whites outperform minorities in just about every category.
In the military skills, we find that the minority officers do not shoot as well as the non-minorities. Now, how do you rationalize? I don't know. I can't explain that to you, but we're going to find out. They don't swim as well. And when you give them a compass and send them across the terrain at night in a land navigation exercise, they don't do as well at that sort of thing.
But if you've got a black major You figure he's met all these qualifications.
Yep.
You've brought him along.
Yep.
He's been in your culture for
Yep.
10 years or more.
Yep.
What's the explanation at the top of the pyramid? What's going on up there?
Performance.
So you're saying that the blacks just aren't as good?
I'm saying that there are problems that we have got to identify that will show us what it is that cause us to promote at a reduced rate. It is not intended that we do that.
Many of your black officers say that they are not promoted at the same rates as whites because there is racism rampant in the Marine Corps.
I don't accept that, and I think that may be the perception if you have talked to officers who either have not been promoted or who have some other grievance. There is not racism in the Marine Corps.
General Mundy insists that the Marine Corps wants to increase the number of minority officers and is searching hard for college graduates who are officer material.
We are not a bigoted organization. We work very hard to try and ensure that that isn't the case.
In the meantime, minority officers already in the Corps continue to be forced out. This summer, after 7 years in the service, Captain Hartman was told to pack up and leave. The Marine Corps says he didn't have what it takes to be an officer. Hartman says it's because he's not white. Somebody out there is going to listen to you and say, look, he just didn't cut it. He just wasn't good enough. And now he's making up an excuse and he's screaming racism. In other words, there were people who complained about your performance.
Ms. Stahl, I'm not going to sit here and tell you that I was, in fact, excellent at everything. If you want to start applying objective criteria to every pilot who was in that squadron, a lot of people are going to come up a little short. Nobody's perfect. To decide that I'm the imperfect one that is going to be singled up and held to the whipping post, well, that's an interesting, what I like to call a low-tech lynching.
And you were the only one?
And I was the only one.
And you were the only black?
And I was the only black.
Hartman thinks the only way minorities can ever make it in the Marines is for the Corps to stop promoting people based on fitness reports written by their commanding officers.
Subjectivity tends to promote itself. Well, when you have nothing but a bunch of white people at the top, what are they going to promote? People that remind them of themselves.
Now you're leaving.
Absolutely.
You're out.
Yep.
What are you going to do?
I'm going to go to law school.
Where are you going to go?
I'm going to Harvard Law School.
You got into Harvard Law School?
I got into Harvard Law School. And interestingly enough, when I was at Headquarters Marine Corps, I spoke with General Krulak. And General Krulak said, you know, Captain, perhaps there is a problem when it's easier to get into Harvard Law School than it is to stay in the Marine Corps. Since this story aired, the Marine Corps has beefed up its Equal Opportunity Office and has been promoting a greater percentage of minority officers than before. There's even a new African-American general. And Bruce Yamashita, who had been kicked out of officer candidate school, won his fight to become a Marine officer. Today, he's Captain Yamashita. Still, about 90% of all Marine Corps officers are white.